Welcome back here with us on Times Now. Viewers, joining us now is the former CEO of SriLankan Airlines, Captain Suren, who is going to explain to us the possible reasons behind the crash of the supposedly uncrashable plane. We are talking about the Boeing Dreamliner that crashed on Thursday in Ahmedabad. Thank you very much, sir, for speaking with us here on Times Now. What is your assessment of what perhaps went wrong or could have gone wrong with AI 171?
Yes, I saw the second video first. It's not the one with the takeoff, the one with the aircraft flying. And my first impression was this was an aircraft on descent because it was obviously losing altitude, but it didn't have much flaps extended. That's the devices on the trailing edge or the rear of the wing. So that was puzzled me, and then I saw the crash and I realized that it wasn't actually descending, but it was in an uncontrolled descent towards the ground. I subsequently saw the takeoff video, and most of the takeoff video actually looked normal. The rotation point was about right for that weight, and even on a hot day in Ahmedabad for the sector length, and the initial climb looked perfectly normal. What we didn't see is quite interesting. We didn't see the rudder, that is the tail, moving at all. And if there was a loss of thrust on one engine, it's what we call asymmetrical thrust, you would see the rudder moving. Well, the rudder barely moved. So from that, we can speculate that if there was a loss of thrust, it happened at roughly the same time. What's also very interesting is the landing gear was down. Now, the landing gear is the first action once you're airborne. The pilot monitoring calls rotate. The pilot flying will pick the nose up. The aircraft will get airborne. And the pilot monitoring will call positive rate or positive climb. And the pilot flying will respond gear up. That's a sequence of events. So the gear is retracted at roughly 200 feet above the ground, give or take. The video shows the aircraft at 600 feet, and the gear is still down. From that, we can come to the conclusion that there was a severe workload issue in the flight deck.
You're talking about the workload of pilot. We are talking about the Dreamliner. It is the safest and the most reliable aircraft. It is supposed to be uncrashable. Can this be a case of twin engine failure, in your opinion?
That's a really good question, and that's really the $1 million question. If it was an internal failure of both the engines at the same time, that is statistically so unlikely that it should be ruled out. I hope that's not the case, because if that's the case, then the engine manufacturer, General Electric, and Boeing have a huge problem on their hands. At this stage, this is purely speculative, and I do apologize for that, is the only possible explanation could be what we call foreign object damage, that something was ingested into both engines at the same time, causing them to lose power. And therefore, the aircraft became uncontrollable. It lost lift, and it descended until it impacted the ground. That is really the best summary we can come up with at this stage. Something caused the engines to lose thrust simultaneously, not one engine, but both. And therefore, the aircraft was uncontrollable.
Are you hinting at some kind of a sabotage here?
Oh dear, no, I didn't want to imply that at all. It can't be ruled out. Nothing can be ruled out at this stage. But no, I did not go there. I came, until we know otherwise, this should be regarded as an accident.
For the benefit of our viewers, can you help us understand what do pilots do when they proceed for takeoff? Could you break down the process from the time the plane is ready to take off?
Everything that we do in that Deepak are completely choreographed, as in what we do, when we do it, the words we use are all absolutely standard. That's how these aircraft have been designed and flown for the last few decades. So what, for example, in the last stages of the takeoff, the tower would have cleared the aircraft to line up and cleared it for takeoff. The pilot monitoring would have then said, Air India, the flight number cleared for takeoff. The pilot flying would have said takeoff, advance the thrust levers and press the switch on the thrust levers, which engages the engines to produce takeoff thrust. They then, as the aircraft accelerated, the pilot monitoring, they would be both watching the speed gauges because speed is a primary function at that time. They would call a V1, or the aircraft will call it automatically in most cases. V1 is the last speed at which you can stop on the runway. After that, they're committed to the takeoff. And then at rotation speed, the pilot monitoring will call rotate. The pilot flying will then move the control column towards him, lift up the nose, and the aircraft will leave the ground. Once the aircraft is climbing, the pilot monitoring will call positive climb or positive rate. I don't know which India uses. They are both standard phrases. The pilot flying will look at his instruments, confirm that they are climbing away from the ground, and he will call gear up. The pilot monitoring will then reach forward, pick up the landing gear handle, call gear up, and place it up. Then pilot monitoring will monitor the gear lights, which will be 3 green lights, which will turn into transition and then go out when the gear is safely up and locked. That completes the initial takeoff phase of flight. They did not get to complete that phase. So whatever happened, happened very quickly.
Now, as a pilot yourself, what is your assessment? What could have really happened for the captain to, say, losing power?
What he means is he would have seen that initially they would have started climbing, obviously, because they got airborne. And after a certain stage, you'd have probably noticed that the speed was falling. So when the speed falls, at that stage of flight, it's a function of engine power. So he'd have reached across and advanced the thrust levers forward to command more power. When he didn't get any power, at that stage, he would have realized something was wrong. And then he, I don't know who made the call, but somebody made a mayday call just to advise how it was going on. Now, there is some speculation that there's a device called the ram air turbine, which produces electrical power. The 787 is a completely electrical airplane. So if the engines produce the power needed for everything, if the engines are not producing sufficient electrical power, the ram air turbine, or RAT as we call it, will deploy. It can be seen on the right side of the airplane at the midpoint of the fuselage. If that deployed, that's a dead giveaway that the engines are not producing enough thrust. Because if one engine is producing thrust and electrics, the RAT will not deploy automatically.
And what do you make of the whistleblower allegations against Boeing, the maker of the plane here, that company had resorted to shortcuts?
I think at that stage, that would be pure speculation. We don't know what caused the loss of thrust. Now, if there was an internal problem with both engines at the same time, which is statistically unlikely but not impossible, it would actually be a problem with General Electric and not with Boeing. So I think pointing fingers at this stage is not a good idea, and we need to hold back for the sake of those 2 pilots and their passengers.
But, you know, there are several questions that are being raised today, because we're talking about 241 lives that have been lost, and there are several others who were not inside the plane also died because of this plane crash. People are questioning Air India and Boeing. There are obviously safety concerns. How do you see them?
I really feel for Air India because I do believe the company was on the cusp of great change and return to the glory that we knew as young people. And it's a real shame that this had to happen now. I don't see that we can blame either the corporate culture of Air India or the manufacturing culture of Boeing definitively at this stage. So really, as I'm sure it's a tragedy of unimaginable proportions if your family was on that airplane today. But we really do have to hold back and wait only for a very short time. The flight recorders have been recovered. They will be read shortly and we'll know the basic facts of what happened very soon. So really we must calm our emotions down and wait for the sake of those on board that airplane, if not anyone else.
You've flown the largest passenger aircraft, the Airbus A380. How does it compare to the Boeing 787 Dreamliner in terms of safety purely?
I think the A380, the A350, and the 787 are all of a similar generation of airplanes, the most advanced we have, and they are extremely safe. Until this accident, there has been no hull losses of any of those airplanes, which is a great thing. And unfortunately, sooner or later, I suppose it had to happen. But until we know what happened, it's important that we don't point any fingers, that we don't blame the pilots, the airline, or the manufacturer. Let's just let cooler heads prevail, and let's just hold back our emotions until we know the facts of what happened.
Well, absolutely. We'll have to see what eventually comes out. But Captain Suren, thank you very much for speaking with us here on Times Now and sharing with us your perspective.